What would you do if someone stole the seat you paid for and the airline told you to move? Picture this scenario. You work hard all week, you pay for your seat, you follow all the rules. But when you get on the plane, someone else is sitting in your spot. And when you ask them to move, they say no. Even worse, the airline workers tell you to find another seat. Would you fight back, or would you just walk away? This is exactly what happened to Marcus Johnson last Tuesday on a flight from Atlanta to Miami. But Marcus isn't just any passenger. He's the CEO of a tech company worth millions of dollars. He built his business from nothing, starting in his garage with just a laptop and a dream. Today, his company employs over 500 people. But none of that mattered when he stepped onto that Delta flight. Let me paint you the full picture. Marcus had just finished 3 days of back-to-back meetings in Atlanta. The kind of meetings where you shake hands, make deals, and change people's lives. His phone had been buzzing nonstop for 72 hours. Emails, calls, texts. His calendar was packed from morning until night. Even his coffee needed coffee, if you know what I mean. Marcus was exhausted. All he wanted was to get home to Miami, sit in his first-class seat, close his eyes, and just breathe. He had paid extra for seat 1A, the window seat in the front row, not because he liked to show off, but because he needed the space to think. As a CEO, quiet time was precious. That seat represented peace after a storm. Marcus arrived at the airport early. He always did this. He hated rushing through airports like a crazy person. Instead, he walked slowly, looking around, watching people. Airports were like small cities to him. You could learn a lot about human nature just by watching how people acted when they were stressed, tired, or running late. He rolled his black carry-on bag behind him, checked the departure board, and headed to the Delta Sky Lounge. As a frequent flyer and successful businessman, he could afford these small luxuries. But he didn't dress flashy or wear expensive jewelry. Today he wore a simple blue button-down shirt, dark jeans, and white sneakers. Clean, comfortable, professional, but not showy. Inside the lounge, Marcus got a cup of coffee and sat by the big windows overlooking the runway. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through the news. One headline caught his eye and made him chuckle. Airline CEO apologizes for overbooking disasters. He shook his head and muttered under his breath, "They never learn, do they?" 20 minutes later, his phone buzzed with a boarding alert. Marcus finished his coffee, grabbed his jacket, and walked toward gate B12. The boarding area was already crowded with people, even though only first-class passengers had been called. He sighed, adjusted his bag strap, and looked around the waiting area. That's when he noticed her for the first time. A woman in her mid-40s with perfectly styled blonde hair, wearing pearl earrings and a white blazer that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. She stood near the first-class boarding line, tapping her foot and checking her phone every few seconds. She had that look. You know the one. The look of someone who expects the world to bend to their wishes. Marcus didn't think much about her at first. Just another impatient passenger eager to board. When his boarding group was called, he walked up to the gate agent, showed his phone, and was waved through. He walked down the jet bridge calmly, grateful that in just a few minutes, he'd be settled in his seat. Seat 1A wasn't just fabric and metal to Marcus. It represented everything he had worked for. Late nights building his company. Early mornings pitching to investors who didn't believe in him. Countless moments when people looked at him and assumed he couldn't possibly be the person in charge. That seat was his small victory, his earned reward. But peace wasn't on the menu that day. When Marcus stepped onto the plane and looked toward the front row, his seat was already taken. And sitting there, looking completely comfortable with a glass of champagne in her hand, was the same blonde woman he had noticed at the gate. She glanced up at him, gave a polite smile, and went right back to scrolling on her phone. No concern, no recognition that she might be in the wrong place. Marcus paused in the narrow aisle, blinking once as if his eyes were playing tricks on him. Row 1 window seat, his seat. But this woman was settled in like she owned the place, her expensive handbag tucked neatly beside her, acting like she belonged there. This is where our story really begins. Because what happened next would turn a simple flight into a battle over respect, dignity, and what happens when someone finally says, enough is enough. But before we get to that heated confrontation, let me ask you this. How many times in your life have you been in the right, but chose to stay quiet to avoid making waves? How many times have you let someone else take what was yours just to keep the peace? Marcus was about to face that exact choice, and his decision would ground an entire airplane and teach everyone on board a lesson they'd never forget. Marcus cleared his throat politely. "Excuse me," he said, his voice calm and friendly. "I think you might be in my seat. That's 1A, right?" The woman looked up from her phone, her smile tight and practiced. "Yes, I'm in 1A," she replied confidently, as if that settled the matter completely. Marcus tilted his head slightly, keeping his tone patient. "I don't think so. My boarding pass says 1A. You might want to double-check yours." For just a split second, uncertainty flickered across her face, but then her posture straightened, her chin lifted, and she held up her phone with the mobile boarding pass displayed. "It says 1A right here," she announced, loud enough that the man in 1B turned to look. Marcus leaned forward slightly, not wanting to invade her space but needing to see the screen clearly. What he saw made his stomach tighten. The boarding pass clearly showed 12C, middle seat, row 12, way in the back of the plane. Not 1A, not even close. He took a breath, still keeping his voice level. "Ma'am, that says 12C, not 1A. She frowned and looked at her phone again, squinting slightly. Then she let out a small laugh, the kind people make when they think someone is being ridiculous. No, that's not right. I always fly in first class. I always sit in 1A. Marcus blinked. Always? Seats don't work that way. They change with every flight. She crossed her arms, phone still in hand. Look, maybe there was a computer error when they printed the tickets, but this is where I sit. This is my seat. By now, several first-class passengers were watching. The man in 1B pretended to read his magazine, but his eyes kept darting over. The woman across the aisle had paused her phone conversation. Even people boarding behind Marcus had slowed down to see what was happening. Marcus felt that familiar pressure in his chest. The same feeling he got in business meetings when someone questioned whether he really was the CEO. The same tightness he experienced when people assumed he was the assistant, not the boss. But he had learned over the years that losing his temper never helped. Calm, clear words carried more weight than anger. "Ma'am, I don't want to argue with you, but your boarding pass clearly shows 12C. My ticket shows 1A. I'd really appreciate it if you could move so we can get this flight started." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Well, maybe you should just take 12C then. Problem solved." A murmur rippled through first class. Someone whispered, "That's not how it works." Another passenger shook his head in disbelief. Marcus straightened up, his grip tightening on his carry-on handle. He thought about all the times he had bitten his tongue, all the moments when he had chosen to stay quiet rather than make a scene, all the boardroom meetings where he had to prove he belonged while others were simply assumed to belong. This felt like one of those moments. Small on the surface, but carrying the weight of 1,000 similar experiences. He leaned in slightly, his voice firm but not raised. "With respect, I paid for seat 1A. That's my seat. I'm not moving." Before she could respond, a flight attendant appeared, smiling that bright, practiced smile flight attendants use to calm upset passengers. Her name tag read, Sarah. "Is there a problem here?" Sarah asked sweetly. Marcus exhaled slowly. "Yes, this woman is sitting in my seat." Sarah looked between them, then at their boarding passes. Marcus caught something in her expression, a tiny hesitation, a brief pause where her eyes lingered on him just a moment too long. It was subtle, but he had learned to recognize these micro moments over the years. "Let me take a look at both boarding passes," Sarah said diplomatically. The woman, who Marcus later learned was named Jennifer, handed over her phone with an exaggerated sigh. "I already told him this is my seat." Sarah studied the screen carefully. Her smile never faded, but there was a long pause before she spoke. "Ma'am, your seat assignment shows 12C. Marcus nodded, finally feeling some relief. Here was someone who could see the obvious truth. But Jennifer didn't budge. She tilted her head and gave Sarah a look that said, "You understand, don't you? That has to be a mistake. I booked first class weeks ago. I always sit up front. Sarah maintained her professional tone. I understand, but 12C is actually in coach, not first class. That's impossible, Jennifer snapped. I specifically paid for first class. There must be an error in your system. Sarah turned to Marcus. Sir, may I see your boarding pass as well? Marcus handed it over without hesitation. Sarah looked at it, compared it to Jennifer's, and nodded. Yes, seat 1A is correct for Mr. Johnson. Finally, Marcus thought. Case closed. But Jennifer's smile had transformed into something sharp and demanding. I don't understand why I should have to move. I'm already comfortable here. Can he just take 12C? It's not that big of a deal. Marcus felt his jaw clench. The familiar frustration was building, but he kept his voice controlled. It is a big deal. I paid for first class. I paid for this specific seat. Sarah looked uncomfortable, caught between two passengers. And what she said next made Marcus realize this wasn't going to be resolved easily. Well, Sarah began hesitantly, maybe just for today, Mr. Johnson, you could take 12C. That way we can keep boarding smooth and avoid any delays. The words hit Marcus like a slap. Several passengers shifted in their seats, eyes wide with disbelief. Everyone understood what had just happened. Sarah was asking the person who was right to give in to the person who was wrong. Jennifer's entitled smile returned instantly, as if she had known this would be the outcome all along. Marcus stared at Sarah, then back at Jennifer, then at the passengers who were watching this unfold. He could feel their eyes on him, waiting to see what he would do. Would he back down to keep things smooth? Would he take the path of least resistance? The answer forming in his mind would change everything. Marcus looked directly at Sarah, his voice quiet but carrying clearly through the cabin. So let me understand this correctly. She takes my seat. You confirm it's mine. And instead of asking her to move to her assigned seat, you want me to leave first class and go sit in coach? Sarah's smile faltered. I'm just trying to make this easy for everyone, sir. Jennifer jumped in, emboldened by what seemed like support. Exactly. Why create drama? You'd still be on the same plane. It's just a seat. Marcus turned his attention to Jennifer. It's not just a seat, it's about respect. I followed the rules. I paid for what I wanted. And now you're both telling me that doesn't matter because it's more convenient to reward your mistake than fix it. The silence in first class grew thick. A man across the aisle muttered, He's absolutely right. A woman 2 rows back added, This is ridiculous. But Jennifer crossed her arms and dug in deeper. I've been flying Delta for over 10 years. I'm a loyal customer. I don't think one small seating mix-up should ruin my flight experience. Marcus let out a short laugh, but there was no humor in it. Interesting. I've been flying Delta for 8 years myself. I'm also what you might call a loyal customer. In fact, I own stock in this airline. But apparently, my loyalty means I should give up what I paid for so you can keep what you stole. That got Jennifer's attention. Her eyes narrowed, but she still didn't move. Oh, please. Everyone claims they're an investor these days. Sarah looked trapped, standing between 2 passengers who clearly weren't going to back down. Her indecision was making everything worse. More passengers were paying attention now, some taking out their phones to record what was happening. Marcus felt his patience wearing thin. But instead of getting louder, he got quieter. His voice dropped to the tone he used in boardrooms when he needed people to really listen. I'm not moving, he said simply. I've spent too many years being told to step aside, to take the lesser option, to make things easier for everyone else while my dignity gets checked at the door. Not today. Jennifer scoffed, but there was a flicker of doubt in her eyes now. She looked at Sarah, expecting backup that wasn't coming. The captain's voice suddenly boomed over the intercom. Flight attendants, prepare for departure. All passengers should be seated with seatbelts fastened. The timing was perfect and terrible. The cabin wasn't settling down, it was heating up. Sarah tapped her earpiece and whispered something urgently. Within seconds, another flight attendant arrived. This one was older, a tall man with gray hair and a name tag that read Robert. His smile seemed more rehearsed than genuine. What's the situation here? Robert asked, lowering his voice, but not enough to hide his words from nearby passengers. Sarah gestured between Marcus and Jennifer. "We have a seating dispute. She's in 1A, but it belongs to him." Robert glanced at Marcus, then at Jennifer, then back at Marcus. His expression was professional, but Marcus caught something familiar in his eyes, that same quick assessment, that split-second judgment call. "Sir," Robert said to Marcus, "if you wouldn't mind taking 12C for this flight, we can get everyone settled and depart on time. We really don't want to delay the other passengers." Marcus couldn't believe what he was hearing. "You want me to move to coach even after confirming this is my seat?" Robert kept his tone even. "It's just a few rows back. You'd still get the same meal service." Jennifer leaned back in Marcus's seat, her arms crossed like she had already won. "See? He's making this much harder than it needs to be." Marcus's jaw flexed. He looked around the first-class cabin at all the faces watching him. Some looked sympathetic. Others seemed uncomfortable. A few were recording everything on their phones. "Do you hear what you're both saying?" Marcus asked, his voice rising just slightly. "You're asking me to reward her for taking what's mine. You're telling me that following the rules doesn't matter if someone else decides to ignore them." A ripple of murmurs went through the cabin. More passengers were nodding now. One man near the galley called out, "That's messed up, man." Robert raised his hand slightly. "Sir, please keep your voice down. We're just trying to resolve this situation quickly." "No," Marcus said firmly. "You're not resolving it. You're enabling it. And I'm done being quiet about things like this." He turned slightly, addressing not just Robert and Sarah, but the entire first-class cabin. His voice was clear and steady. "Everyone can see what's happening here, right? She takes my seat. They confirm it's mine. But instead of asking her to move, they want me to back down. How many times does this happen? How many times do people get told to stay quiet, don't make waves, just go along with what's wrong to keep things smooth?" The cabin was completely silent now except for the hum of the air conditioning. Passengers leaned forward, hanging on every word. A woman 3 rows back spoke up. "You're absolutely right. This is wrong." Another passenger added, "Give the man his seat." "This is crazy!" Jennifer's face flushed red, but she remained defiant. "I'm not the villain here. Maybe their computer system made an error." "These things happen." Marcus shook his head slowly. "No error. Just entitlement. Just the assumption that if you act confident enough, people will believe you deserve things you didn't earn." Robert was losing his professional composure. "Sir, please lower your voice. You're disturbing other passengers." Marcus looked him straight in the eye. "No, I've lowered my voice too many times in my life. I've stayed quiet when I should have spoken up. I've made things easier for others at my own expense more times than I can count. But not today." The standoff was complete now. Marcus stood in the aisle, unmovable. Jennifer sat in his seat, equally stubborn. The flight attendants looked helpless, caught between policy and politics. But Marcus wasn't done. He had one more card to play, and it would change everything. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. But instead of making a call, he opened his email app and began typing. His fingers moved quickly across the screen. "What are you doing?" Sarah asked nervously. Marcus looked up from his phone. "I'm sending an email to the airline's board of directors. As a shareholder and frequent customer, I think they should know how their staff handle situations like this." Jennifer's eyes went wide. "You can't be serious." "Dead serious," Marcus replied, still typing. "This flight isn't leaving until this gets resolved properly. And if that means we sit here all night, so be it." The cabin erupted in whispers and gasps. Robert's face went pale. Sarah looked panicked. Because Marcus had just done exactly what he promised. He had grounded the plane. The first-class cabin buzzed with energy now. Passengers were pulling out their phones, some recording videos, others texting friends about the drama unfolding at 30,000 feet, or rather still on the ground. Whatever happened here wasn't staying in this cabin. It was about to go viral. A businessman in seat 2A spoke up, his voice carrying authority. "He's absolutely right. That woman is clearly in the wrong seat. Why is this even a debate?" A female passenger further back added. If the roles were reversed, this would have been solved in 30 seconds. Jennifer whipped around to face them, her voice getting shrill. "Excuse me? Are you implying something about me?" The woman didn't back down. "I'm not implying anything. I'm saying the truth is right there on that boarding pass and everyone can see it except you." Jennifer's cheeks turned bright red. "This is harassment. He's creating a scene over nothing." Marcus looked at her calmly. "Nothing? You took the seat I paid for. You refused to move to your assigned seat. Then the staff asked me to give up my rights to keep you comfortable. That's not nothing. That's the same pattern I've dealt with my entire career." His words hung heavy in the air. The cabin had gone quiet again, everyone listening to every syllable. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Flight attendants to the galley, please. Flight attendants to the galley." Robert and Sarah hurried toward the front of the plane, whispering urgently to each other. Through the open cockpit door, Marcus could see them talking rapidly with the captain, hands gesturing toward the first-class cabin. A young passenger from economy had pushed through the curtain and was watching the whole scene unfold. "Yo, just give the man his seat already. We're all trying to get home tonight." Laughter and agreement rippled through both sections of the plane. But first class remained tense, waiting to see what would happen next. Jennifer straightened her white blazer and looked around, suddenly realizing she was losing the crowd. The sympathetic looks she expected weren't there. Instead, she saw faces that ranged from annoyed to disgusted. "This is insane," she muttered. "All of this over a chair." Marcus turned his full attention to her. "If you think this is about a chair, you haven't been listening. This is about respect. It's about doing what's right instead of what's convenient. It's about not rewarding people who take things that don't belong to them." More heads nodded throughout the cabin. A man near the window called out, "Preach, brother!" The captain himself emerged from the cockpit 5 minutes later. Captain Williams was tall, with silver hair and the kind of presence that made everyone straighten up. He walked directly to where Marcus stood in the aisle. "Gentlemen, ladies," he said, his voice carrying natural authority, "I understand we have a seating issue that's preventing departure. May I see both boarding passes?" Jennifer and Marcus handed theirs over immediately. Captain Williams studied them carefully, comparing the details. Then he looked up, his expression serious. "Seat 1A belongs to Mr. Johnson, Miss—" He glanced at Jennifer's pass. "Miss Patterson, your assigned seat is 12C in coach." The cabin exhaled collectively. Finally, someone in charge had stated the obvious truth. But Jennifer wasn't finished fighting. "Captain, surely there's been some kind of computer error. I specifically booked first class. I always fly first class. This gentleman could easily take 12C and everyone would be happy." Captain Williams' expression didn't change. "Ma'am, there's no computer error. Mr. Johnson purchased seat 1A. You purchased seat 12C. It's really that simple." Jennifer tried a different approach, lowering her voice as if sharing a secret. "Captain, think about the other passengers. We're already delayed. Wouldn't it be easier if he just moved? Why let one stubborn person hold up the entire flight?" Marcus caught every word, and his chest tightened with familiar frustration. But this time, instead of staying quiet, he spoke up. "Captain, I want everyone to hear this. She just called me stubborn for wanting to sit in the seat I paid for. She's suggesting that I'm the problem for not giving up my rights to make her theft more convenient." The words "theft" hung in the air like a challenge. Jennifer gasped, but several passengers murmured agreement. Captain Williams raised his hand for quiet. "Miss Patterson, you need to move to your assigned seat immediately. Mr. Johnson, you have every right to the seat you purchased." "But I'm already settled here," Jennifer protested. "My bag is stored, I have my drink. Why should I have to move when he could just—" "Because it's not your seat," the captain interrupted firmly. "And this conversation is over." The cabin erupted in quiet applause. Someone whistled. A few passengers actually cheered, but Jennifer still didn't move. Her pride was battling with reality, and pride was winning. Captain Williams sighed and spoke into his radio. "Ground operations to Gate 12, please. We need a supervisor." Marcus watched all of this calmly. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't made threats. He had simply refused to accept being treated unfairly, and now the entire system was responding. 10 minutes later, 2 more people boarded the plane. They weren't flight attendants or pilots. They were wearing business suits and official airline badges. The woman in charge introduced herself as Patricia Rodriguez, Delta's station manager for Atlanta. "Good evening, everyone. I apologize for this delay. We're here to resolve this seating dispute quickly so you can all get to Miami." She looked at both boarding passes, just as everyone else had. Her conclusion was the same as everyone else's. "Mr. Johnson, seat 1A is yours. Ms. Patterson, you belong in 12C. She turned to Jennifer with a stern expression. "You need to move now, or we'll have to remove you from the flight entirely." The cabin went completely silent. Everyone understood that this was the final moment. Jennifer looked around the cabin one more time, seeing nothing but unsympathetic faces staring back at her. Her shoulders sagged slightly as reality finally set in. "Fine," she said quietly, gathering her things with shaking hands. "But I want everyone to know that I've been a loyal Delta customer for years, and this is how you treat me." As she walked past Marcus toward the back of the plane, dragging her bag behind her, passengers began to applaud. Not mockingly, but with genuine appreciation for justice being served. Marcus didn't clap. He didn't smile. He simply sat down in seat 1A, his seat, and buckled his seatbelt. Patricia Rodriguez addressed him directly. "Mr. Johnson, on behalf of Delta Airlines, I sincerely apologize. This should never have happened, and we'll be reviewing our staff training to ensure it doesn't happen again." Marcus nodded. "I appreciate that, but I hope you understand. This wasn't really about one seat on one flight. This was about respect and fairness. Everyone watched how your staff initially handled this situation, and everyone learned something tonight." Patricia nodded seriously. "You're absolutely right, and we will do better." As the plane finally pushed back from the gate 25 minutes late, the cabin was buzzing with conversation. Passengers were sharing the story, posting videos online, talking about what they had witnessed. Marcus sat quietly by his window, watching Atlanta disappear below. He didn't feel victorious or proud. He felt something deeper, a sense of dignity restored. Not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever been told to shrink to make someone else comfortable. Hours later, as the plane landed in Miami, passengers stopped by his seat as they exited. "Thank you for standing up," one woman said. "You spoke for all of us tonight," added a man with a briefcase. Marcus nodded politely, but he didn't need their praise. He needed change. The next morning, Marcus's phone was buzzing with notifications. The story had gone viral on social media. Videos from the plane showed the entire confrontation. News outlets were calling for interviews. But Marcus was already focused on the future. He spent the morning writing a detailed letter to Delta's board of directors, not asking for apologies or compensation, but demanding systematic changes in training and policy. Because if it happened to him, a successful CEO with resources and confidence, how many times did it happen to people who couldn't fight back? The lesson from that night wasn't about airlines or seats or even entitled passengers. It was about the courage to stand firm when it's easier to stay silent, about demanding respect instead of hoping for it, about understanding that sometimes the smallest battles represent the biggest principles. So here's my question for you. When life hands you a moment where you know you're right, but standing up seems hard, what will you choose? Will you shrink to make others comfortable, or will you stand calmly but firmly for what's yours? Because respect isn't optional, and silence shouldn't be the price of peace. If this story made you think, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Justice happens when good people refuse to stay quiet.